Welcome back, everybody. I'm Rustin.
I'm Tammy.
And I'm Mike.
And we are so glad that you're joining us. If this is your first time with us, that's great. We are walking through Michelle Couchat's book called A Faith That Will Not Fail. And if you just now joined, feel free to get the book and join us right where we are. You don't have to jump back and go through the previous practices. Every practice matters and expands our development of our discipleship. So we're glad that you're joining us. Today is day 5 of Perspective, and it's about knowing God. And how do we know God in new ways, shift our perspective on that.
Yep. I appreciated Couchat talking about kind of her earlier faith and how it was pretty transactional and, God, I did all these things and I expect you to behave in a certain way because I did these things. I was a good Christian. So then why is my marriage ending with divorce? Why do I have cancer?
Yeah.
And it's a real redefinition, a real understanding of God if we kind of redefine what a gift is and what grace is.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, right, I love calling into question kind of the cultural norm right now, especially within evangelicalism, of this kind of prosperity, gospel, transactional relationship with God. And yet the truth is, in our pews every Sunday are a ton of people who've gone through divorce. And, we've had messy marriages ourselves, and people who suffer with depression. Hi, I'm one of them. People who struggle with alcohol, people who, we have all of these realities in our space, and being more upfront and honest about like, hey, I had this idea that if I followed God, that A, B, C, D, and E would not be true for my life.
Mm-hmm. That all of this would be healed. And that's just simply not it. That the prosperity gospel, I hope we kind of debunk that a little bit, and that God gives us a promise of presence, not a promise of perfection in the way that we might be defining it.
Yeah. And not a promise of, the idea is like, if we follow these rules, right, everything should be right.
No, I think I like what you're saying, Mike, because I think, going back to what we talked about a few weeks ago or days ago about the wall, all of these things that we're naming right now are walls. Mm-hmm. And then what does it look like to know God differently? And to say, hey, just because I've hit this wall, perhaps this is a moment where I can expand my definition of God, expand my reality of who God is and what God's trying to even do with me, and what gift is, and what this means, and what grace means, and how all of these pieces play in to who we are. I think it's just, again, part of what I love about this text is they're practices that we don't think about often. And I think they're the practices that take us beyond the wall. I think they're the practices that give us that next growth moment into what would be kind of fourth phase of discipleship, of connecting with God past the hardship, past the places of, man, this did not happen like it should have happened. And I'm mad at God. And I'm angry and I'm hurt. And I think being able to say that and name that and then not ending the relationship by not just moving on is a radically important process and a faith practice in our journey.
Yeah, I'm mad at God, and yet I'm going to step forward in faith and trust and hope
that God's got me.
Yeah, I mean, I see this in my marriage, right? Me and Juliana got married at a young age, in our early 20s, and the person I married then is not the person I'm married to now, right? And so there is this kind of expectation that we do change as time goes on. Well, how about our relationship with God? We've heard, well, God never changes. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. But our way in relating with him and who God reveals himself to be in our lives does change. And so how do we, adapt with that? This God who is different than when we met him in our early 20s or early teens, at an altar or at a, camp somewhere. This God is drastically different than the first, the God I met in those days.
Yeah. I think part of the piece of this and part of the practice of this, right, is if you're going through one of these moments, which we know a ton of our people in our church are, is to not walk away.
Yeah.
Right? To stay in. That might be as simple as choosing to get up and to come to church, even though your marriage is falling apart.
Yeah.
To continue coming to church, even if you can't get pregnant and you think you should. To continue coming to church and connecting with other people of faith, even if like your kids are not what you wanted them to be or expect them to be.
Even if you're an alcoholic, even if
all
you're
those things,
all the things.
even if you're saying I'm not good enough that's simply not true.
And I say the coming to church piece on that because I do think part of what shifts our perspective is when we meet other people who have made it through that next step. And I think that's the challenge that I would give us today is even if keep showing up and keep asking God, I need you to expand my knowledge of you.
Yeah.
I need you to give me a different picture because the one I was given and the one I've held is no longer enough, and I don't want to walk away. And I think God will answer that.
You know, I think our practice for today should be maybe a little different than one we had written down. What I keep hearing is this God is wants to meet me, right? And so maybe the practice for today is this. It's not today, it's on Sunday. You know, make your way to a church service, come to St. Matthew, and engage in communion. I love what happens there. It's this idea that God has made all things ready for us. We don't have to come to the altar and beat up ourselves or do anything else. God has made all things ready. And so I encourage you maybe this weekend to find a church, participate in communion, and meet this God who's going after you, who loves you in spite of everything every wall that you throw up.
And maybe you've not actually been to church since COVID.
Yeah.
Put on a mask, go to church,
Yeah.
have communion,
Join
connect
us.
with God. We'd love to have you here, or go to any church. Just connect with people of faith because that will shift our perspective of knowing God. Have a great week. See you next week.